What branch of service were you in?
Marine Corps.
What were your dates of service?
October 20th, 1964 until I was released from active duty 1st of July 70, but then I had my discharge was July 1st, 1971.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
Since you enlisted, why did you join?
Well, primarily because if I wouldn't have joined, I'd have been drafted into the Army, and I wanted to go in the Marine Corps instead of the Army.
How old were you when you enlisted?
20.
Do you recall your first days in service?
Very well, yes.
Tell me about your boot camp or training experiences that you had.
Boot camp, well, the Marine Corps boot camp has its own reputation, and drill instructors would, if they had something to say to you, they'd get about 6 inches or less off your nose and scream at you, and you were standing there at attention. You had to stare straight ahead. They didn't want, as they said, no eyeballing, and so you just stare ahead as if you're looking right through them. And but there was a tremendous amount of marching and rifle movements and so on. And they later were shortened, but we went through 16 weeks, and they crammed an awful lot of information about the Marine Corps into you in those 16 weeks.
What type of work did you perform while in the service?
I was a pilot, both a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, and I got back from Vietnam. I was an instructor pilot in fixed wing. I instructed aerodynamics, all the fun stuff, the loops and rolls and Immelmans, Cuban 8s, and barrel rolls and all that things. And then after a year, I was transferred to be a standardization instructor, meaning I instructed other instructors.
Where did you serve?
Well, I went to boot camp at MCRD, Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, California, and then I went through Infantry Training Regiment, ITR, in Camp Pendleton in California, and then I was able to become a Marine Aviation Cadet, and that was in Pensacola, Florida, and small bases near Pensacola for 18 months. I got my flight training in wings and commission when I finished that. Then I was transferred to Santa Ana, California, and stationed there for about 10 months. And then I was transferred to Vietnam. I was there 13 months. Da Nang, Marble Mountain, which is close to Da Nang, Vietnam. And then I came back and became a flight instructor at Pensacola, Sofley Field near Pensacola, the rest of my active duty.
When you were in the service, did you see combat?
Yes, a lot of it.
Tell me about the chaos of a war. Did you know where you were most of the time and where the enemy was, or what your objective was, and what to do when you found it?
I knew where I was all the time. We were assigned to different flights for certain missions, and we were told what we needed to do, whether it was troop inserts or hauling cargo or bringing people out. The missions changed all the time. We always knew where we were and where we were going, but we never knew where the enemy was. Often you had no idea until the bullets started flying. You'd see the tracers coming up at you, and the holes in the aircraft as we got where they were. But they were very good at camouflage.
What did you believe at the time was at stake in the war, or what did you think you were fighting for? Did that change once you actually got overseas and into combat?
Well, yes, I bought into the thing where we had to stop the communists or they'd take over all of Vietnam and then go on some country and just like dominoes take over the whole world. And we were to stop that. But then after a while I got disillusioned so often. One particular place in mind was Ashaw Valley, northwest of Da Nang, a big, totally jungle-covered valley. We had to take that valley. We went in there, the Marine Corps and Army, lost a lot of helicopters, an awful lot of fighting soldiers on the ground. The Marines, the name for the guy on the ground was called a grunt. That was just what they were called. Lost a tremendous amount of grunts. And we had the ability and the resolve, and we did take Ashaw Valley. We owned the Ashaw Valley. And then we got it, we'd all cleared out. It was free zone for us. And then they said, the powers up high said, okay, you can move out of there now. And we're all thinking, what? We lost all these people, all these helicopters to take this valley we had to take, and then we move out and let the enemy just walk right back in again? Why? And so not only I, but many people became very disillusioned. It was a political war. We could have won that easily. But the politics was, in watching this Vietnam War series on PBS, the number one goal is not to make the president look bad or so on, and then the other things were less in comparison to that secret memo they put out back then, and it was a total waste of time, because we lost 58,000 some Americans and millions of Vietnamese, and ended up 15 years later, if we'd have just never gone there in the first place, they'd have taken over exactly as they did in 75. And what were we there for? I'm convinced that we had no reason to be there. And I also believe that war is only a last resort.
How did you feel about the enemy that you were fighting, or like how do you feel about them now?
Well, when we were fighting them, they were the enemy. You were out to get them. You kill them before they kill you, and that's what it was all about. And they were great fighters. They were tremendous at camouflage. You didn't know where they were. They hit our base with rockets and mortar every single American holiday. You could just plan on them. Holidays coming up, get ready because you're taking incoming fire. And looking back at them now, a lot more respect than we had at the time of what they were able to accomplish with their limited resources at first. They were fighting us initially with punji stakes, and they dig a pit in the ground and cover it over, and they take these sharp stakes and put in the ground, and you'd walk along and fall into a pit and get punctured with all these sharp stakes in there. And the sharp stakes were dipped in human waste and so on, so when you did get punctured with those, you got tremendous amount of infection.
Did you write home often, and like did you describe what you were actually experiencing in your letters when you wrote home?
I tried to write home every day, either a letter or my wife had a tape recorder and I had a tape recorder, and we would send tapes back and forth, all free, free postage. And instead of a stamp, you just write free up in the corner where the stamp went. And I would play sometimes that tape recorder, the sounds of the war around me, but I didn't describe the gore and the killings and the mutilations and all that. I didn't see the need for it, but for the most part honest, except for that.
What reminded you most of home when you were overseas?
The letters that I got, we had mail call every day, and everyone standing around, and it was just a big downer if someone didn't get a letter in a day. And people, my mother, my wife would write me about every day. My mother would write me once a week maybe, and tell what was going on back home, and that kept me in the loop. Plus we had Armed Forces radio and Armed Forces TV, and of course it was politicized. They told us what we wanted to hear.
Yeah. What do you think people should know about what you went through, and what do we need to remember about your war?
Well, I think most people don't realize what all we went through. They talk about the World War II veterans being the greatest generation, but history has proven that the average World War II soldier saw 2 weeks of actual combat, in other words, shooting and getting shot at, 2 weeks out of the 52 weeks in a year. The average American Marine and soldier and so on had 50 weeks out of the 52. In other words, we were shooting and getting shot at just constantly. I don't, except the very first few missions when it was kind of a lull, I took my first hits on Christmas Eve of 1967. They opened up on my helicopter. I had 24 holes in the cockpit of my helicopter, and after that, part of the debriefing after a flight was go over the helicopter and count and mark and where you had another bullet hole, and sometimes you knew where they were. We had to fill out the paperwork. Where did the shots come from? Sometimes you knew, but most of the time you didn't. They just were there. They weren't there when we took off, but they certainly were there all over the place when we got back.
Tell me about a couple of your most memorable experiences.
When I flew night medevac, we always came back just riddled with holes because we'd get the Marines out of a hot zone and were incoming fire, and we'd be sitting there like a big target, and they just riddle us with holes and get the wounded on there and take off and fly them back to the hospital at China Beach, which is just north edge of Da Nang on the bay.
Were you awarded any medals or anything like that?
I was awarded a lot of medals using the same standards as they had set up in World War II. You get so many points for flying over enemy territory, for getting shot at, for getting hit, returning fire, and so on. And we did this every day, so they added up like crazy. So I got a whole pile full of air medals, and after a while, there just wasn't room for all the air medals that we pilots were getting, so they started putting numbers on there. So instead of having a bronze star for 5 air medals and a silver star for 5 bronze stars and so on, we ran out of room, so they just started giving numbers. But I can't remember them all. They're on my DD 214, which is your discharge papers. But I got part of a Presidential Unit Citation, Meritorious Unit Citation, Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, and those are the ones that come to my mind at this time. But we all came back with a lot of them.
What was the highest rank you achieved?
I got out as a first lieutenant. If I'd have stayed in, a month or maybe less, I was just about ready to be promoted to captain. I just didn't quite have my time in, so came out as a first lieutenant.
Did you ever feel pressure or stress?
Not really. I guess you just had to think that, well, none of those bullets had my name on them, and it didn't do any good to worry. I know a lot of them came back with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the VA asked me a lot of questions about that, and decided that I don't have it. I never had nightmares or had problems sleeping or anything like that, like I know some of them did. But you just went out and did your job, and one thing about it, whenever we had a real dangerous mission, as an officer, I had quite a few that worked under me, and I'd say I got this dangerous mission coming up, and so instead of appointing someone, I'm going to ask for volunteers. Never a problem of getting a volunteer to go on a dangerous mission. It was all ready and willing to go.
Was your education supported by the GI Bill?
Yes, I went to quite a few different schools, paid for by the GI Bill.
Did you take any college classes while you were in the service?
Yes, I did. The Naval School of Pre-Flight was just, in addition to all the military and so on, was an awful lot of classes, college-type classes, and in 18 months, they said it was the equivalent of 2 years of college.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Yes, I think it would be good for everyone that's physically able to do a stint in the military like they do in Israel, to understand what it's about and just get their act together, you might say. But regarding war, as I mentioned earlier, I definitely believe that war is a last resort only.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
I very well recall my last day, and I had the choice of renewing my term or getting out, and if I'd have stayed in, I'd have been back in Vietnam before too long. And my son was 3 weeks old, and I'd already done it when we were married just 6 months. I didn't want to leave my wife with a brand new baby and go to Vietnam again, so I took the option to get out. But it was with a lot of feeling of nostalgia as I cleaned out my locker, and you got to go through this checkout sheet to all these different areas to check out, and there was because I loved what I was doing at the time, and it was a lot of nostalgia that I had when I was getting out.